as my colleagues did. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a few steps. But that's not really the approach we're taking towards COP21. I think that our president and our secretary certainly have been exceptionally committed to progress on climate change and to try to achieve an ambitious outcome in Paris. I think the best indication of the U.S. seriousness on this is the fact that, as I'll explain, that our domestic policies have really flourished. There are initiatives, outreach, all sorts of activities of every kind. And I think that provides a fairly transparent and obvious map of how the United States will make good on its commitment. So if you read the FT this morning, as I did, you will have seen the various comments that our secretary made in a fairly long speech on a number of issues, including foreign policy, migration, and things like that. But I think that, and the announcement that President Obama will attend the Paris conference, also a high priority. So I think if we look back over the last year, maybe 18 months, we will see that our commitment has been speaking out publicly, working with all levels of our government, including federal and sub-federal, state and municipalities as well, private actors, and working with countries, as my colleagues mentioned, at different levels of development, because this is a global agreement. This is a global problem, and no, it will not be resolved in Paris, but hopefully we'll make tremendous progress, and that progress will require global efforts. So a new agreement, we believe it would be a historic step. We're thoroughly committed. It would establish for the first time an ambitious, durable climate regime that applies to all countries. That's important. That is fair. That focuses on both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building resilience, includes, as my colleague from Germany mentioned, strong accountability measures, and ensures ongoing financial and technical assistance to those in need. And there are many of them. We announced our contribution early, not as early as Switzerland, but we announced it early enough with Chinese President Xi, making the joint announcement, and we pledged to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. We also pledged to provide $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund as part of the $10 billion initial capitalization. We've also welcomed, I think, and in every one of Secretary Kerry's speeches, he's mentioned this, the unprecedented levels of support for Paris, for a positive outcome from businesses, the subnational governments I mentioned, even the faith community. We all heard the Pope on this subject, and many, many others in civil society. And that is one thing that we're working on at home, and we hope to engage with other partners in Paris on. For example, the White House launched the American Business Act on Climate Pledge, and they all voiced their strong support for a positive outcome in Paris, and announced significant pledges to reduce their emissions, increase low-carbon investments, and take other actions that build more sustainable businesses and tackle climate change. So to date, more than 80 companies have joined this initiative, and these are companies that have headquarters in all of our 50 states. I find these numbers pretty amazing. Employ over 9 million people, represent more than, $3 trillion in investment. So very impressive. Local governments. We have a challenge. We're not the only ones with federal systems. But literally, states and cities in the United States have the responsibility to improve public transit networks or plan pedestrian-friendly communities, which is new in the United States, of course, in recent history. And they're also sort of the frontline defense against climate change's worst effects. With this, Vice President Biden, I think he announced an agreement with 83 U.S. cities. It's called a Compact of Mayors. Mayors sometimes are more important to the average citizen than presidents and ministers. And so the White House challenge is to have 100 U.S. cities commit to the compact before COP21 begins. So we think this is positive. At the national level, we support a Paris outcome that includes a long-term goal, as Peter said, for deep decarbonization over the course of this century. This is vital. We want to keep the Earth's temperatures from climbing higher than the 2 degrees. On mitigation, we've got a 5-part package. First of all, the strongest possible INDCs from as many countries as possible. We're very, very encouraged that now I think we have about 150 countries that represent 90% of global emissions who have submitted INDCs. So that's pretty impressive. Second of all, we like the idea that my colleague mentioned, a built-in notion of successive rounds that ratchet ambition up every time and have every 5 years a periodic stock taking. We think this would be useful. And then looking at the deeper future, countries should be urged to develop notional strategies. They can't be that concrete, but perhaps a white paper at the very least for the kinds of deep reductions that we hope to make by 2050. I mean, it will be there before we know it. Fourth, the agreement should include a long-term goal for deep decarbonization during the course of the century. And finally, and I think we're getting there, and I must thank France as an organizer, the Paris outcome should include a broad expression of commitments and activism by non-state actors, state and local governments, private sector, civil society, and then improved and stepped up collaborative action among interested governments, and I think that's taking place. COP21 has the potential to be a landmark moment for climate efforts, but it won't be the last word, of course. The global economy already, as many of the individual countries here represented know, are shifting more rapidly thanks to new energy sources and new generation techniques, electric vehicles, and smart grid technologies and other trends. So this is a positive direction. We take heart from the success and cooperation on the Montreal Protocol Agreement. Hopefully this will be a sign that we're heading in the right direction. As you know, in Dubai, we agreed with a number of partners to address the use and production of HFCs. This is, yes, it's not the whole problem, but it plays a major role in driving climate change, no doubt about it. So this is a major accomplishment. The Montreal Protocol, certainly among my colleagues who work on the environment, is viewed as as a success story, and we hope this success will move on to Paris. So the United States is committed to reduce these emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025, and we're backing up that pledge with a number of new policies and initiatives that we hope will achieve that goal. In August, President Obama announced the Clean Power Plan, which establishes for the first time ever carbon emission standards for U.S. power plants. So this new rule will lower power sector emissions by an estimated 32% below 2005 levels by 2030. It establishes state-by-state targets for carbon emissions reductions and offers a flexible framework for states to comply. Each state has a specific target based on its current portfolio of electricity generation. Put simply, the Clean Power Plan puts the states in the driver's seat, the local government, to choose the path that works best for them. Obviously, the plan varies. Each of the 50 states has different advantages. Washington State, for example, with huge rivers, the Columbia River and others, and very famous or infamous rainfall, not dissimilar to where we are now. Washington State provides 30% of U.S. hydroelectric power, which is pretty impressive. Certainly impressive to me. I'm from the East Coast. But in other states, as you know, Arizona, California, places like that, solar power offers great promise. So we think this is a plan that pulls in the right direction and motivates states to improve efficiency, to run cleaner power plants, to shift towards cleaner fuels, or use renewables of their choice. And states can take those reductions all the way to the plug-through and energy efficiency and trading programs within their state or with other states. And a great example of this is the Northeast Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is, for us, it's very similar to the European Union's NER 300 program. Basically, it's the first market-based regulatory program in the U.S. That reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So there are 9 states from Maine to Maryland, and they've capped the carbon emissions from the power sector at 91 million tons, for example, in 2014. The cap will decline 2.5% each year from 2015 to 2020. And the states sell nearly all their emissions allowances through auctions, and then they invest the proceeds in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So the final plans, I believe, will be submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in September 2016. Closer to home, cars and trucks. I don't know how many of you drive trucks, but we've made quite an effort. We see them a lot on the road and try to avoid them. But the EPA has established standards for light-duty vehicles that double how far these vehicles can go on a liter of gas. And this has been a big push, starting in the first Obama administration, now in the second. Medium and heavy-duty vehicles account for 20% of emissions on the road, but they make up only 5% of the vehicles on the road. And the trend is not good. So we're pleased that the president has issued regulations here and intends to improve things. So we have some other fuel efficiency standards that by 2027 will lower fuel consumption and carbon emissions. Basically, these efforts, as planned out, will save 75 billion gallons of fuel and 1 billion metric tons of carbon emissions. So that's 1 billion metric tons of carbon emission, just for point of comparison, is the equivalent of the power consumption of all U.S. homes in 1 year. So there's probably some work to be done there. Private industry partnerships with government. The U.S. Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy have invested millions in researching ways to reduce vehicles' fuels consumption. And I don't know if you've seen these. I saw one right before I left. It's called a boat tail. It's at the end of a truck. It's sort of very strange looking. We drove by and thought, my goodness, what is that? But apparently, according to a European study, the boat tail permits a heavy-duty truck to save, I think, 7.5% on its fuel consumption. So little things go a long way. And of course, the private sector loves it because better fuel economy means reduced costs in an industry that has fairly thin margins. Obviously, there's some utility for countries at different stages of development. We hope so. And then in our neighborhood here, the U.S. and the EU are working very, very closely under the auspices of the Transatlantic Economic Council and the U.S.-EU Energy Council. Actually, my ambassador was just out there in Ispra, Italy, for the inauguration of the Electric Vehicle and Smart Grid Interoperability Center. This is working with the European Commission's Joint Research Center. So he was fascinated by it. It's a trip I wish I could have taken because it sounds like fun. The JRC actually has a twin near Chicago at the Department of Energy's Argonne Laboratory. So these two groups, JRC and the DOE, and the private industry and the international standard bodies are making an effort to develop these technologies, standards, and practices to assure that there's a smooth and a broad expansion of our electrical vehicle fleets. I think I'll stop here, but just to say, in my 20-odd years in the Foreign Service, working for government, I've never seen an engagement at this level. It really is taken personally by the president. Yes, he's a politician and he's in legacy mode, but he takes it very seriously. And there's no doubt that on the first day that Secretary Kerry came into the office, that environment was going to be a focus of his. And he's turned around the focus of the State Department to address issues on water, oceans, fisheries, wildlife, protecting wildlife, and the question of climate change. And, he was on the front page of the FT yesterday, and I dare say he'll be on some front page in the next week, also on these things. So we take our responsibility very seriously, not just on the political side, but in transparent ways, in domestic ways, in ways that affect our citizens on a daily basis. And I'm happy to be able to have shared this with you, and I hope we can work through with you to make Paris a success. Anyway, thank you again to BBH for hosting this.